I find it incredibly offensive, the word Latinx. Like, for crying out loud, why don't you, all you progressives, focus on your own language? Why don't you focus on English? Why do you have to attack our language, our people's language? It just makes no sense at all. And then by doing that, you're projecting your own bias onto what our family members have. So you're saying, okay, everyone that uses Latino is now against women. Welcome back, everyone, to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP.
And I'm Peter.
We hope that you have a great start to your new year going so far. But since we are Catholic and it is still a Christmas season, happy last day of Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. I still have my Christmas tree up.
So do we. Trying to milk every last bit out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, turning from a cheery subject to one that is our subject for today, this is the race episode. We're going to be talking about race a little bit. And what prompted that was I was watching an episode of Frasier last night, the old TV show from the 90s and early 2000s, which was very popular in its day, about a radio psychologist. They basically made a show featuring one of those popular medical people that used to be on the radio. I don't know if they still are. I don't listen to the radio. Maybe they're still on there. But back in the day, I remember there used to be doctors who turned on the radio who would be giving life advice. And Frasier was a show about that, one of those people. And there was an episode where the main character, Frasier, had a guest producer for a week who would constantly be interrupting him to give her own advice. And the producer's role was just to screen callers and present them to the doctor, not to actually advise. But he was too scared to say, hey, stop interrupting me. I'm the doctor. And the reason why was because the producer was Black.
For heaven's sake, Frasier, why don't you just talk to her?
Well, it's a delicate situation, Miles. For God's sake, it's not all that easy. She is new to the field. She's sensitive. She's eager to please.
She's Black.
Dad, please.
And this episode, which aired on national television, would constantly be bringing up, oh, you're scared to do something because someone is Black. And you're scared to correct someone because someone is Black, which is not something you could get away with today on national television. We're probably not going to be able to air this on YouTube. At least we'll air it, but no one will see it. Pete, what are your thoughts on that?
It's very obvious today that they wouldn't even think that of writing that today, let alone like airing it on TV. I think they're coming from like a very opposite kind of mentality when it comes to race, which I think we'll get into in a little bit, but it is pretty crazy and dangerous to see the way race is treated today, which is even different from how it was treated when I feel like when I was a child. I think things have changed even in that short time span.
Yeah, they've changed radically. And just to be clear, this wasn't a conservative show. If you're not familiar with Frasier, this was very progressive for its time, and has many things that I disagree with in it. It's still very funny, so I don't mind watching it. But this particular thing shows how the progressives have changed their talking points radically and completely. As Chesterton says, there's nothing quite so old as progressive thought. And what I am seeing here is that in the early 2000s / late 90s, there was a desire for people to come together, to overlook race and to speak to one another as if they're just, the part of the human race, not part of not Black. Not the Black race or Latino race. I'm sorry, Latinx. So don't want to offend you, Peter. I know
It has
you
to stop.
take that. I know you take that very seriously. I mean, we don't want to be guilty of using the Spanish language properly, because that would be just so terrible.
Mhm.
You know, it's the race episode, so we can
the
bring
best
up
way that we can honor Hispanics is to destroy their language.
Yeah, you
That's
know,
what
I
the
find
left
that
thinks.
as someone who speaks Spanish, not great, but you know, our mom speaks it fluently, and so does half of our family because they're from the border, and you know, we have a lot of Mexican background. I find it incredibly offensive, the word Latinx. Like, for crying out loud, why don't you, all you progressives, focus on your own language? Why don't you focus on English? Why do you have to attack our language, you know, our people's language? It just makes no sense at all. And then by doing that, you're projecting your own bias onto what our family members have. You know, so you're saying, okay, everyone that uses Latino is now against women, is now, you know, a male chauvinist. And it's just incredibly, it's all projection. It's incredible projection. But anyway, go ahead, Peter. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say it does kind of remind me a little bit of like this mentality that there was at one point in history, where you have the white, what is it called? Like the white savior complex or whatever it is, where like we have to, you know, go and educate these people. Like, oh, they have a gendered language. Oh, we need to go and like, we're going to change it because we're going to, you know, save them, show them the proper way of being and talking.
Right. We're just so simple. We don't realize how offensive it is. And so
we're offending ourselves without realizing it.
They need to illuminate us. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, overlords. So back to what we were talking about, the progressives making the show Frasier in the early 2000s. There was a desire for people to overlook race and to just come together. And I remember there was an interview with Morgan Freeman where he says, quite famously, how do you, someone asked him, how do you get people to stop being racist? And he said, stop talking about it. And in that same interview, they ask him, what do you think of Black History Month? And he says, I don't like it. Why do I have to confine Black history to a month? There's not White History Month, so why should there be Black History Month? I mean, that was the attitude really of the mainstream, I would say, progressive movement during that age. And now the mainstream progressive movement has shifted completely, where we have, you know, let's talk about the Black Panther, where you have people going crazy because it's an all Black cast. And that's the thing, is that race is front and center in every which way. And you need to push that idea of how race is important. You cannot forget about race. Race. It's shoved in our faces. And it's kind of a incredible shift over the past couple of decades, really the last decade.
Yeah. I mean, I think really growing, I think that there's a couple of things for me. One, I think I, you know, grew up around like the 2000s, 2010s, and I guess 2010s, that is the time when it started becoming a little crazy. And then also I grew up in Houston, which is, I think, one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the United States, like per capita. And so like really, I was raised around a plethora of different races, you know, black people, white people, Hispanics, Asians, like all the different, you know, tons of the different Middle Easterners. And like, I never like gave it a second thought until like kind of like Morgan Freeman was talking about there, where like people started talking about it. And then you start looking around like, oh, you know, like these people that I just viewed as my, you know, everyday interactions and as people are now like, you're telling me that this one's a threat to me, or I'm a threat to this one, and you're like, and you start, having this stratification of people, which is really terrible, and I really hate that. And so like, it's something that I didn't have, it was so much, I just felt like it was such a friendlier world, before everyone started pointing guns at each other.
Literally. I mean, you look at the riots of the past summers. I mean, people were I remember I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I don't know what they were doing here, but they were putting up posters in their storefronts, little store owners, not even the chains, were saying, look, we're minority owned, we're woman owned, we're Black owned, please don't loot us, because people were just going through and just breaking and looting everywhere. It was insane. I heard of shop owners like sitting with loaded guns by the front door of their shop, because they know if this gets taken, especially as COVID's going on, I'm done. I prefer to die than have my shop get looted. So it's incredible.
But BJ, we're making a big, huge error here. Actually, today is January 6th. So this is the day the worst day in history, actually. I don't know if you realize that. So this is the day that our democracy was attacked, So we can't talk about anything else. We can't point out that we had this riot on January 6th, but then we had an entire summer of riots where the cities across the United States were literally in flames, and people were losing their lives and their livelihoods. And we can't talk about that because January 6th. Okay?
I forgive me, dear viewer. Yes, January 6th did happen. This will be airing after January 6th, but it did happen, and it was terrible. I don't like it. And it was a fraction of the damage to hardworking Americans, and a fraction of the loss of life to policemen. And and there's some bad policemen out there, and I've met them, and there's some really good policemen out there, and I've met them, and I'm sure both died. Probably more of the good ones died during the summer riots, the race riots that were brought on by this ideology that we see. And I think it's the same ideology that we saw starting with the Black Panther, where they were saying, they were oohing and awing about how it was an all Black cast. That's a divisive idea. And it always, whenever anybody has an ideology that is that divisive, it's only met with violence. Either it wins in violence or it dies in violence. And I don't think the people that are pushing that ideology, I doubt that they're going out it with the idea of saying we want to create violence. Maybe they are. But if they aren't, it's a poor knowledge of history that has misguided them to think that this will end in anything, this type of division will end in anything but violence.
Yeah.
But that leads me to jump to it. What do you think motivations are for this? Because that's the first thing I always ask. So the mainstream progressive movement now is pushing division. It's saying that race is all important. It must be pushed in your face. That if you go out and you riot, you're just speaking to the pain that no one else can know. So you're fine if you go out and you riot, because you're speaking to pain that no one else can know. So if that's the mainstream progressive movement now, why? What are they going for?
I'm not really sure, but a couple of thoughts do occur to me. One is that when you look at what has happened in the past few years, especially like in the summer of 2020, when all those riots were going on and all the cities are in flames, the things that suffered the most are the little people, right? The people that suffer the most are the little people, the little businesses. And if you look at just what has happened in the past couple of years, what what is this, the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer in terms of like companies, you know, like Amazon has just shot, like is so huge, which it was huge before, and it's huge. It's just getting huger because more and more people are buying online instead of going, you know, to the store, to the corner store. And so like, I think I'm pretty sure it was Nancy Pelosi that like was belittling the riots of 2020 when she was talking about January 6th, saying like, this is a big deal because this is attack on our sacred democracy. And don't get me wrong, like I have a lot of respect for Washington, D.C. and the Capitol. I do love it. And I do have a bunch of friends who are DC cops actually, and they've told me a lot about what happened there and how hard it was. But she's belittling the attacks in the summer, and she's saying like, well, this is attack our sacred democracy, whereas like in the summer, like what happened, just a few taco stands were burned down. And you're like, wait a minute, like those taco stands are somebody's livelihood. That's someone's ability to feed their family.
So and it wasn't just a few of them, and they weren't just taco stands.
Right. I mean, it's all kinds, like these are cities, these are businesses. And so I think two thoughts that occurred to me for us as far as possible motivations is that one, if you look at just the results are is that big business, big companies have more of a monopoly now on their on the market, right? The small companies, the little people's shops were literally burned down. And it was big companies that encouraged it, right? It was social media companies, Instagram, those kinds of things, where these things were being praised and upheld as a proper way to civically engage, right? You were being shamed and put down if you weren't posting the black square on your social media account, or if you weren't saying, I feel your pain and this riot, these rioting is so justified. Like if you weren't like literally saying those things, then you were ostracized by your friend group, which is just crazy to me. How can you literally were forced to at least express support for the riots and for stores being burned down and for houses being attacked. So it's like that's one possible motivation, like that these businesses are just literally using people as pawns to grow their monopoly. And then of course, another thought that occurs to me is that the government always wants more control, right? The government's always trying to be bigger, and the government in certain aspects thrives on chaos because then they have an excuse to assert more control. And I think that comes off as a little bit conspiracy theorist, but I don't think so at all. I don't think that it is at all, because there's a lot of things that I thought I would never see in my life that happened in 2020. So I think the government has, for one thing, is blatantly becoming bigger and bigger as the years go by, and you can see them not wanting to relinquish and let go of that control that they have over the population. And I think it is really, like you were saying, very divisive to the country. And you kind of see it like what more conservative oriented states are really making much bigger strides now to combat that control that the central government is having. And I think that it's causing not only division, in the streets, between people, me and, another bystander I see outside, but also between states, which I think we're seeing that kind of division that we haven't kind of seen since literally like the Civil War.
Right. No, I agree with that. The earmarks of division have not been seen like this since the Civil War. And I want to clarify the question a little bit. I think you were trying to gauge the motivations of the leaders of the progressive movement. And you mentioned both political and private business, or public business. They're publicly traded. And I think that is useful, obviously. But I don't think I'm qualified to try to guess what the motivations are, because I'm not one of the big people. I don't have enough money to be included at the table and hear what those people are talking about. And maybe if I was some kind of elite hacker, I could figure out. I mean, Hillary Clinton is an open book, obviously, at least to the Russians. So at least we know something of, or hackers know about her. But in any case, my question more, what I think we could actually figure out a little bit better is, what are the rank and file? So we're not of the progressive movement, but at the same time, we're the rank and file of another movement. I wouldn't even call it conservative movement. I would say the Catholic movement that I think is resurging underneath, just because of how people are, just what you said earlier. So many things happened in 2020 that we never thought would ever happen. And there's a lot of Catholics out there that are just fed up. And I think that we're a part of that movement, the Catholic movement that's like, no, this is not okay. And that applies to church leaders, to the bishops that are cowards, as well as the politicians that they don't deserve the conservative vote of approval, as well as all the progressives. So there's a lot of that going on. But if we want to be successful, we should know the other side. And so in just talking about the mainstream progressive movement, what the rank and file wants, what they're thinking, I would guess that there's two things here. One of them is pretty malevolent, and the other one is naive, is the way I think of it. Starting with the malevolent one, it's no secret that the progressives have pretty well aligned themselves with Marxist theory. And what Marxists do, they always strive on class struggles. That was what Marx taught them. Given that we don't have a clearly stratified class system here in the United States, you need to kind of create one. And in order to create one, you can't really build it off of, because the US is built off the idea that someone in the lower class can move up to the higher class. Like that's the American dream. So that's a tough sell to say, well, no, you can't do that, because that you have to go across all of that upbringing, especially the immigrants that come here, the immigrants that flock to the United States are not going to be sold that bill of goods, because that's why they came here. So, that's why our ancestors came here not so long ago, just a couple of generations. That's why they're here, is because we know in America that you can rise up, and better than any other place in time, really. So that, if that avenue is closed for Marxist theory, then the best way to create them, it seems to me, to create a caste system, is by going through race. And so if you want to create this system for which Marxist theory can operate, and thereby undermine the capitalist system, which has its own flaws, so you're recognizing the flaws, and we've spoken to them in past shows, then the fact that we have so many immigrants that came and are coming, and we are already different in a lot of ways. The United States is more diverse than any other country, I believe, in history. So then you've got, these are the tools at hand. Use race to create this system, so that you can bring about your Marxist utopia. Now, does that mean that I think that most of the rank and file progressives are Marxists? I don't know. I'm not sure. What do you make of that?
I mean, I really doubt that the majority of them fully realize the ideology, because I think Marxism as an ideology is a little bit more abstract than a lot of people will take the time to think about. Not saying that any of them would not be capable of thinking about it, just that they probably don't think about it so much. But I definitely think that it is a growing movement and growing trend in the United States. And the funny thing, of course, about Marxism is that it's equality for everyone except for the people who are in charge, who end up with everything, right? Like you saw is last year with one of the big leaders for the BLM movement bought like a giant house like in like Malibu or something like that, you know?
That's how the party leaders always are.
Yeah, like you saw it in communist Russia too, with the, you know, the inner circle was just vastly rich and lived like kings. And so it is at its, of course, at its foundation a lie. But I think for the vast majority of people who participate in it, I think a lot of them don't really fully realize what they're participating in. And, you know, because it is a cleverly disguised movement. I mean, nobody disagrees that Black Lives Matter. Like, we obviously, that's a self-apparent statement. And I remember like being in LA where we used to see these yard signs like on so many different houses where they had just a bunch of, I guess, leftist kind of calling cards, like ideas that they're presenting as left, but they're just blatantly self-apparent like statements like Black Lives Matter, like obviously, yes. And then just like love is love. Like, yep, okay, that's you just repeated the same word, like that's obvious, like okay. And just random things. And I think there was one that I didn't even understand what they were getting at, like water is life. I'm like, oh yes, okay. Like you would look at these signs and be like, I agree with all of these things and I don't know what you're talking about, but you know that they're using it to scream at you and be like, look, you disagree with these things, don't you? And you're like, not really. But then you're like, then why aren't you screaming at other people to kind of uphold these ideologies, this Marxist idea? And you're like, well, you're using self-apparent statements to make hidden, like there's a hidden message behind that I don't agree with. And it's just like the idea that of Black Lives Matter is, of course, we agree. But then underneath that movement is clearly, like if you read their goals for the United States, it's anti-family, it's anti-America. And that is obviously just very unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, I do want to push back a little bit. I think the mainstream progressive movement is made up with a lot of people that are college educated, I would say, but not well college educated. You went to a private university. I went to a public university. And there was a lot of thought in these I went to, not more than one public university. And there was a lot of thought in these public universities that was sneakily Marxist. Some of them more blatantly Marxist, but most of it sneakily Marxist. So I think the mainstream progressive movement has a lot of Marxist tenets that they plant their flag on without even realizing that it's Marxist. Like a lot of the things that you said right there are examples of that. And people could plant their flag on it and not realize that, oh, wait a minute, that destroys the family. So which is a Marxist, that you want to destroy the nuclear family so that you can make people reliant upon the big brother of the state. You want to destroy religion for the same reason. So do you think there could be some sneaky motivations behind there where people are just poorly educated?
I mean, absolutely. And I think that it's a very rare person that you meet on the street or you meet anywhere that really knows anything about history, And so like you could literally sell these people anything in their education because I think that I would really blame the public education system, like in high schools and middle schools, that they just don't teach history. Or maybe they do, but they teach it so terribly that everyone forgets it the first chance that they get. And so when they get to college, they're ready to be fed anything, you know? And so these ideas which I think if you were, a lot of these ideas that are presented to people in college, that if you knew things about history, you would be like, that is clearly a Marxist idea that originated with this and this. But if you don't, then you're susceptible to be like, oh, actually, that this is a new idea. Okay, this makes sense.
I haven't heard this before. Just because you haven't heard it before doesn't mean it's new. Well, I do want to ascribe a less malevolent, more naive idea, motivation. We've spoken a lot in the past about how we feel a lack of tradition. We feel a lack of, there's a disunion from meaning in this day and age. We don't know what is meaningful. And a lot of meaning in the past had been created by having, this was my culture. This was the Mexican culture. We live in a Mexican neighborhood. We go to Mexican. All the restaurants around us are run by Mexicans, so they're Mexican food restaurants, and our church is full up with like that. That was that's the culture was rich and very specific. And the same thing with Italian neighborhoods. The same thing with Black neighborhoods. The same thing with any type of. There was a very specific culture, and the culture had meaning within it, with the traditions that we had. You found the meaning presented within the act of doing the tradition. And now we don't really have that. And so when we're trying to search for meaning, I wouldn't be surprised if mainstream progressives are returning back to, well, this is what my culture is. This is who I am. This makes me special. This makes me important. This has meaning. And therefore I need to flaunt it, which is, I don't think it's necessarily a poor idea. It doesn't explain why all the white progressives constantly are saying, well, we're white and that's bad. That kind of mystifies me a little bit. That doesn't create any meaning whatsoever. It's a suicide of meaning, really, because you're saying, as a person, I'm bad because of my race. But I think you can naively ascribe it to other acts as desperate attempts to find meaning. What do you make of that?
I definitely agree with that, because I am definitely not of the mindset that we need to be erasing our past and our culture and our heritage. I guess maybe this is a place where we diverge from a lot of people on the right, because I remember talking to this a dad of one of my friends in college, and they were Irish, the last name O'Brien, and his first name was Patrick O'Brien. And I was like, oh wow, that's a really cool Irish name. And he was offended. He was like, I'm not Irish, I'm American. What are you talking about? And I was like, you're clearly Irish. And he's like, you're not Mexican, you're American. I'm like, no, I'm Mexican. I don't think that we need to erase our heritage there. I think that has importance on who we are and where we've come from. But I don't think that obviously we are also American. We have that shared identity there, but we bring different kinds of things into that identity. And so I think that your heritage is very important, and no one should take that away from you. That whole idea of white guilt also really bothers me, that someone would tell, obviously I'm Mexican, but for someone would tell a white person, they have a heritage too, white people aren't just all the same. They all come from different countries as well, and they have a heritage and something to be proud of as well. And that someone would tell them you can't talk to this, you need to be quiet right now. That just makes me mad. No one should tell anyone that they need to be quiet because of their color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just that right there is hard to ascribe to naivete. It's I don't see how you can naively tell someone to be quiet. it's malicious. It's as malicious as it gets, because if you're either driving someone to suicide or you're driving someone to violence, there's no good outcomes of saying that. So yeah, that's an example of malicious, as malice as it gets, as malicious as it gets. Yeah, well, I think where can we go with here? Like we see that there's this huge divide between really two parties at this time, with little Catholics at the side. I think on both sides of it, really, but probably more on the progressive side now that I think about it. No, the underground it will be more conservative. Tell me, where do we go from here in your mind?
Well, of course, an important thing, which we've only really kind of a little bit touched on now, is faith, right? Which of course is also being attacked today, like authentic belief in, the truth of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church has always taken like a very both and kind of approach to these, just society's problems that have been thrown at the church. And this is a reason that the church is often attacked and criticized, because they're like, yes, heritage and race it brings you, a sort of identity that it's important, but also like you can't like be stratifying people based on race. And so I think a re-emphasis on faith, in that the truth of the church that you get from your Catholic faith or is important, because it's when you abandon that you start to lose really your identity, and then try to find it in things that aren't going to really give you your true identity. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's an important thing to like stop pointing at other people and be like, oh, it's another race. Like, oh, what do I do? Like, I had never really experienced that until like I moved over into like the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. And then for the first time I saw like people being like, oh, look, it's a Mexican, and like pointing at me, and I'd be like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And then I had like for the first time conversations with like other minorities, like black people, who were like, hey, what's it like to be, like a Mexican over here in this area, blah, blah, blah. And this was like the strangest conversation I'd ever had, to be like really pointed at to as like a minority. And I was like, because where I came from, like everyone just like mixes together and no one talks about it. Which of course is not as much the case today, because now everyone is even here, screaming at each other. But like, it really is, when it comes down to it, like we're obviously just human beings. And if you have, if you get along with someone, then they should be your friend. Like if you want to be friends with them, they should be your friend. It doesn't matter what their race is. And I think people are really like just paying way too much attention to like people's race, and saying like, oh, I can't like associate with this person. And I think it damages relationships between the different heritages that we have, because you're like, oh, I don't know what you've experienced or what you've gone through as a culture, so I can't be friends with you, and I can't associate with you, because I'm going to insult you, or just insult you accidentally. And you're like, that's just such a toxic like way to exist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all heard about people who no longer can be friends with someone because of their political stance, or because they like Trump, or because they like Biden, or because they're white, or because they're not white. There's this increasing phenomena of people no longer being able to be friends. And I think there's good and there's bad. I mean, the bad is we're missing out on a lot of fun. I remember going to remember we went to, for shooting, they sent me to the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem in the old city a few years ago. And so I was staying in the month of Ramadan. I arrived on a Friday, no doubt, which is a holy day for the Muslims, and in the month of Ramadan, which is their holiest month. And my Jewish cab driver was very worried. We kept on driving past barricades with Israeli soldiers armed to the teeth, and they were shouting at each other, and I didn't understand what they were saying, but the cab driver got as far as he was willing to go, and then he stopped and threw out my bags and said, "Your hotel's that way," and zoomed off in the opposite direction. So I picked up my bags and I started walking, and as far as the eye could see, it was Muslims, dressed in their traditional garb, and out, celebrating, because it's Friday in the month of Ramadan. Or maybe not maybe celebrating is not the right word, but they were out. And it was very worrisome because there were a lot of eyes on me. I was dressed like an American. I mean, I wasn't wearing a Mickey Mouse shirt, but I was obviously, I was wearing
dressed
like
as an American flag.
Yeah. And I remember people looking at me and there were a lot of scowls. When I got to the hotel, I made it safely to the hotel. The woman who checked me in did not like me. Was definitely not happy that they had an American at the hotel. Maybe it's a stigma or something, but she checked me in, and I was there for a few days doing small little shoots, and I started being able to, I went out of my way to smile really big to anyone that I saw, and if anybody talked to me, to talk to them back, to be as kind as possible. And at the end of those few days, I had the same woman that checked me in to the hotel saying, you're not American. You're not American. You're like light. Americans aren't like that. And I was like, what? And she was like, oh, no, you're not American. And she walked away with a big smile. And I remember having other conversations with other Muslims that were incredible. They wished me well in my life. The type of blessing that they gave was just so sweet. They would end a conversation with a blessing. And so I think we're missing out if we push away people that are angry at us because we are different. So that's bad. But then there's also the good too, is that embrace that we are different. Don't stop being different because someone is saying, I don't like you, because you are different. And I think most people are not that weak. Most people will be like, well, okay, well, you don't like me, I don't like you. I'm going to keep being what I am. Which I think is actually, I don't like you, maybe I disagree with, but keep being what you are and be what it is more, provided it's a good thing. Obviously, I don't think that you should, if you're a child molester, you should be that more. But if you are a Mexican or a Catholic, or maybe both, and someone doesn't like you because you're a Mexican and strong, and you think very strongly that the Catholic teaching on is right and true and should be followed, then think that more and stand up for it more. I think of what Jordan Peterson would say is, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And there's a lot of pressure to lie in this day and age about what you think and what you feel. And I would say, well, let's follow Jordan Peterson. He's at great personal cost showed us what it means to tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And we have a lot of opportunities to now, with some cost to ourselves, do the same. And I guess the last thing I would say is, I think back to G.K. Chesterton's Napoleon of Notting Hill, where he saw each neighborhood divided, and they fought for, in this vision of London, each neighborhood of London divided, and each person fought for the honor and glory of his neighborhood. And it was a bit of a dystopian future, but at the same time, it was one that was rich and vibrant because people believed strongly. I think a strong belief is better than not a belief in a lot of ways. Even if you believe wrongly, it's better than not believing in anything at all. And hopefully, if you continue, like I'm saying this for myself, if you continue striving to know and grow more and more, go start believing more properly and thinking more properly.
Yeah, because that's the thing there. Like it is good to believe strongly and like to believe wholeheartedly what you believe, and to not be afraid of that view being challenged. Because when your views are challenged, if you don't recoil from it and get all defensive, you actually listen, then your belief will either change or become stronger. If it is a good belief, it can survive you thinking about it more. If it is not a good belief, then maybe that view is going to be changed. But you can't like recoil and hide from anyone who disagrees with you, because that will only leave you having this kind of naive belief, which I don't think is a good thing to have.
Dialogue and free speech. That's what Jordan Peterson always harps upon. And, not just him, but many people. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, and it's a good place to end it. But given that no one's going to watch this episode because Google is sure to shut it down, I hope that those of you that are at this point enjoyed it. Please leave a comment, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Comments are very welcome. We'd like to bring up what people think what people think, and answer questions. So we encourage you to do that. All right, Pete.
Yes, sir. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna at some point have to make T-shirts for people who have like seen these episodes, because they're gonna be like, I watched a band video on YouTube. Like, it should be a badge of honor that if you somehow made it through Google and YouTube's blockers. If you've seen this, I congratulate you. You've done what a lot of people can't do.
All right, everyone. God bless. Bye, Pete.
Adios.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.